You're welcome.
To the White House now, where President Trump touted accomplishments from his recent marathon trip to Asia. He says China is unified in disarming North Korea.
During our visit, President Xi pledged to faithfully implement United Nations Security Council resolutions on North Korea and to use his great economic influence over the regime to achieve our common goal of a denuclearized Korean peninsula. President Xi recognizes that a nuclear North Korea is a grave threat to China, and we agree that we would not accept a so-called freeze-for-freeze agreement like those that have consistently failed in the past. We made that time is running out, and we made it clear, and all options remain on the table.
Senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, Anthony Ruggiero, is in Washington. Anthony, as we just heard, the president said President Xi agreed that a freeze-for-freeze agreement was not acceptable, but China has not publicly denounced its past proposal. Remind us, what is the freeze-for-freeze agreement, and what do you make of the president's comments about it?
Well, the freeze-for-freeze involves the United States and South Korea freezing its military exercises in exchange for North Korea freezing its nuclear tests and its missile tests. Unfortunately, history shows that those things do not, a freeze on North Korea's nuclear and missile tests do not make us safer. It does not stop the threat from North Korea. And the North Koreans can just violate that at any time. And plus, the military exercises are really more of a defensive exercise. I'd be surprised if the Chinese really got away from that policy. That's really been their policy for over a decade. The Chinese see that as the best way to really tamp down the rhetoric between the two sides.
And meanwhile, Anthony, China says it's sending a high-level special envoy to North Korea. What would they be aiming to accomplish, and is this significant?
Well, I think they're likely giving North Korea a readout of President Trump's trip to China. I certainly hope that the Chinese leadership, everybody was saying that when President Xi consolidates his power, he'll be able to, focus more on going after North Korea sanctions evasion activities. I hope that he's sending his envoy there to say time is running out and that the Americans are going to come after Chinese businesses and that the Chinese leadership just frankly can't have that. The North Koreans need to hear that directly from China. I would argue that the United States should be sending that signal directly from the United States government to North Korea, and I'm hopeful that they're doing that through the New York channel.
And on that point, Anthony, it appeared President Trump softened his stance on North Korea during his trip to Asia, saying he hoped North Korea would come to the table. He then appeared to dial it back later in the trip. Could we see a dialogue between the U.S. and Pyongyang anytime soon?
Well, the problem here is that the North Koreans are clearly telegraphing that they're not interested in denuclearization talks, which is what the president mentioned several times in his talk today. The North Koreans are telegraphing essentially arms control talks, basically replacing the role of the Soviet Union with North Korea, basically talks amongst nuclear powers. And that is very dangerous because if the United States gets in those talks, what will Iran say? Iran will say, hey, it might be useful for Tehran to develop a nuclear weapon. What will South Korea and Japan say with our nuclear umbrella over them, really protecting them? I think this would be a dangerous area to get in. This talks about talks, which is what it's called. That's really a trap by Beijing and Pyongyang to get the United States really focused in on talks and not focused in on the goal of denuclearization.
Anthony Ruggiero in Washington, thank you.